Um, One other topic that people had asked about is that we have someone come and speak about the new housing coordinator position at DDS. So Jared Morris, the chief of staff here, is going to talk about that position, which is being funded with our American Rescue Plan Act funds, and how we envision that position being used. So first up, just briefly, I will talk about our COVID data. And unfortunately, we have seen the numbers. People may be aware in the community, the numbers are going up. And that has been true for people supported by DDA as well. In the month of May, we had 15 people who tested positive for COVID. 4 of those were people who had previously tested positive. So the total number of people who have tested positive supported by DDA is 631. Breaking that down by placement type, we have had 1 person in a correctional facility, 15 people in host homes, 128 people in intermediate care facilities, 1 in a mental health facility, 127 in natural homes, 2 in a nursing home, 7 in out-of-state placements, 51 in residential habilitation, and 298 in supported living. Unfortunately, in the month of May, we have had 2 people who required hospitalization for treatment of COVID. One of those people has been discharged and is continuing their treatment at home. The other person is still in the hospital. Interestingly, and as a note of caution for everyone, both of those people were fully vaccinated and had received a booster. And I believe we're still not even yet eligible for their next booster. So it is a reminder that that for folks who we support who are particularly vulnerable because of other health conditions, we still have to continue to be really careful about using appropriate PPE, limiting contact, doing all the things that we've all learned to do in the last 2 years. Fortunately, of the 15 people that tested positive, most of them had minimal symptoms, but we did, as I say, have 2 people who are now in the hospital. To date, we have had 38 people with a confirmed COVID death who it was confirmed that the cause of death was COVID. We are still awaiting the final cause of death for 5 people who died in March and April. Some of those had COVID months prior. So of the people, someone asked a question about vaccination status of all 15 people who tested positive for COVID. There were only 2 people who had not been boosted. All of the other people had all the others had their vaccination and a booster. Those 2 people had their second vaccination, but not yet a booster. And both of them became ill, but not seriously ill. So just about everyone who did test positive was fully vaccinated, was up to date with their vaccinations, including a booster. And so lastly, overall, in terms of our vaccination rates, the people we support, we're still at 87% vaccination rate for these folks. 98% of people in host homes are vaccinated, 99% in ICFs, 79% in natural homes, 100% in residential habilitation, 93% in supported living. Current with a booster among the people we support, we are at 77%. For provider staff, which we update every other week, that is at 96%. provider staff have been vaccinated. And of those eligible for a booster, 67% have received the booster. And amongst DDS staff, I didn't receive an update this week, but as of last week, 97% of DDS staff are vaccinated, with 92% having received their booster. So so that covers our COVID data. First up, as I said, Peter Steffen with Disability Rights DC will be sharing his screen, and he'll be providing a presentation regarding voting.
Thank you, Director Reese, and thank you all for having me. And let me know, you can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. And so if I can ask someone to help me watch for hands and questions, because when I'm presenting, I can't see everything. But my name is Peter Steffen. I am a staff attorney at Disability Rights DC. We are a nonprofit, and we are not associated with the Department of Disability Services or the Board of Elections or any government agency. Today, I want to talk with you all about the importance of voting, your voting rights, and how to go about voting in the upcoming June primary election. We have hopefully time for questions at the end, and you can always call us if you have questions, and our number is right here on the screen. And I'll put it in the chat as well later. So without further ado, first slide. So the upcoming primary election is on June 21st, and the primary election is for each political party, right? Like Democrat, Republican, statehood, Green, and Libertarian, to choose a candidate for the general election. And voting is important. Why? Because under the US Constitution and federal and DC laws, the DC's mayor and council members, and in other elections, the president and senators and others are chosen by voters like you. These leaders then decide what issues become priorities for the government. Things like housing, healthcare, education, and jobs. So it's important to make your voice heard, right? And the Department of Disability Services, is always stressing that people make their voice heard. And in our government, voting is a very powerful way to make your voice heard. Sometimes the outcome of an election can be decided by just a few votes or even one vote. So who can vote? You can vote in the district. And by the way, I noticed that Jay from the Board of Elections is here. So please, Jay, if anything you find needs to be corrected, please just shout out. But you can vote in DC if you are a US citizen, you are at least 18 years old, you have lived in DC at least 30 days before the election, you're not voting in any other state. One of the few ways that you cannot vote is if a judge has said that you're not capable of voting. Right, that means, like in the slide here, you have not been found legally incompetent to vote. So it's a very specific thing that a judge has to find. So basically, you cannot be denied the right to vote because, A, of your disability, even if you have a guardian, or B, where you live, even if you live at home with your family or in a group home or at a facility, and C, if you don't have an ID, you can still vote. Okay, so how do you vote? The process is easy, and there are two steps. The first is to register, and the second is to vote. So first, make sure you're registered, right? And that's really important because the upcoming May 31st deadline for registering by mail is coming up, right? That's on Tuesday. So if you're not sure, you can call the Board of Elections to see if you're registered and see if your information is up to date, like your address and things like that. And I'm going to drop the contact information in the chat. So if anyone needs that information, it is here. And then also, I will show you all very quickly, if I can, about the website, right? And so this is the Board of Elections website. And again, apologies if I'm stealing any of Jay's thunder, but you can check your voter registration status right here on the website. So if you click under, there's a column on the left that says check your registration status. You can click on that and enter your first name, last name, your date of birth, and your zip code, and it'll tell you if you're registered and all of the details. So, okay, what if that's not correct? Or if nothing is found? Then what you should do is submit a registration form to either register or to update your registration. And you can do that. I'm going to drop the link in the chat again, but it's also available on the Board of Elections website. And it's the second option under the red column. You just go and register or update, right? And there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. So one is to do it online. And here's the link right here. You can also fill out a form, a paper form, and then either mail it or email it or fax it. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can submit a voter registration form. You just want to make sure that it's submitted by May 31st, because that's the date when the deadline for submitting the mail registration form for this upcoming June 21 primary. Okay, let's say you need help, right? You can have someone to help you, or if you want, a number of agencies, including DDS and also the DC Public Libraries, can help you fill out the form and get registered. Okay, so then also, this is the form itself, so you can see that that's what it looks like, and the highlighted portion, the part in yellow, is what you fill out. And then, right, along with that form, you need to submit one of the following documents that shows your name and address to the Board of Elections. It can be an ID, but again, it doesn't have to be. It can also be a utility or phone bill or internet bill or a bank statement or a paycheck stub or a rental agreement. There's a whole list of things that are on the Board of Elections website. But basically, it can also be any other government issued document that has your name and address on it, other than from the Board of Elections. Okay, so make sure that you include that copy when you register, or if not, if you're going to vote in person, you can bring it with you, but just don't forget. Okay, so what if you forget to register in time, or the board, sometimes the mail doesn't get to the board in time, right? If you forget, that's okay. In DC, you can go to any voting center and register or update your registration and vote at the same time, right? That's called same day voter registration. So when can you do that? The early voting centers will be open starting June 10th, from June 10th to June 19th. And then election day, again, is June 21st. If you don't have an ID, again, or if you don't even have a social security number, you can still register to vote. Okay, so then after step 1, that's registering or updating, right? Step 2 is to actually vote. And that's where you fill out the ballot, right? And a sample of exactly what the ballot will look like is available on the DC Board of Elections website. And very quickly, I will try to pull that up. So you can see under this middle column, this is again the Board of Elections website. Right here under the yellow column, it says sample ballots, right, by party. And so you can see a copy of each ballot. And that will help you to understand what they look like and also the instructions. So if you have any questions, right, you can look at that. You can also always call the Board of Elections and you can ask any questions that you have of them. So where would you fill out this ballot, right? You can call or visit the website, the Board of Elections website, for the locations of voting centers and the times when they're open. And you can vote in different ways, right? One is in person, which I'll cover in a bit. The other is curbside, which is still at a voting center. And then a third option is voting at home, either by mail or by accessible remote ballot. Okay, if you want to vote from the comfort of your own home, right, the Board of Elections is going to mail a ballot to everyone who's registered by May 31st to the address that they have on their registration. So if you get that ballot in the mail and you want to fill it out, just follow all the instructions that are included, and then you can mail it back, or you can bring it to any voting center or any ballot drop box. Just make sure that you submit it by 8 p.m. on election day. If you don't get your ballot by mail, you can still go in person to vote at a voting center, right? You have a right to vote in person at a voting center. The board has already started mailing out ballots to registered voters, and I, for one, have received mine. I know some other people have, but if you haven't yet, they're doing it in waves, so it may not have arrived yet. You can check to make sure after you send your ballot back that the board has received it, and there's a section on the website where you can check that. Okay, what about accessible remote ballot? What does that mean? For voters with disabilities, you have the option to vote remotely, like I said, at home. And the accessible remote ballot is an electronic ballot that allows you to read and mark your ballot on any electronic device that's has access to the internet. The accessible remote ballot is compatible with all major screen readers like JAWS and tactile switches, closed captioning, and audio-enabled systems. You will need a computer or, like I said, an electronic device with internet access. You'll also need an email address, and you'll need a printer because what you do is first you request the ballot from the board, and there's a special place email address that you can email, and I will drop that in the chat if you're interested in the electronic accessible remote ballot. And then you fill it out on the computer or electronic device. You print it out, and then you either mail it back in the envelope that you receive from the board by mail, or you can also submit it at a voting center. Okay, so let me make sure I get that the accessible remote ballot request information in the chat. There it is. And then let me quickly move on to voting in person. Like I said, you have the right to vote in person. And again, you can call the Board of Elections or use the website to find out where the nearest voting center is. There are at least 3 voting centers in each ward for early voting. Again, the early voting is from June 10th to June 19th. And then there's even more voting centers that are open on election day, and those are open on June 21st. The Board of Elections is not responsible for getting you to a voting center, but services like Metro Access can provide pickup and drop-off service to a polling place. Once you're at a voting center, the poll workers are responsible for making sure you can get into the building where you vote, right? They need to make sure it is accessible. Inside the voting center, you can vote on a machine or use a paper ballot, and there'll be signs showing the ballot so that you can, again, look at the ballot before you vote to see the list of people running for elections. The voting machines use touchscreens and audio for people who are blind or have limited vision. Going back to what we mentioned earlier, you can also vote curbside, right? Which just means from your car or at the sidewalk curb outside of a voting center in front of some vote centers. To check on the location for curbside voting, again, check with the Board of Elections. If you choose to vote curbside, a poll worker will bring a paper ballot out to you to fill out and then return it to count it. If you need help, accommodations, right, for voting because of your disability, you can ask anyone at the voting center, or you can call the Board of Elections, and you can do that at any time. At a voting machine, If there isn't already an audio headset, you can ask a poll worker to provide an audio headset, which lets you use the screen reader software. And the machines are fully adjustable, so you can reach the machine if you're in a wheelchair. For paper ballots, poll workers can provide large print or a magnifying glass. And the voting center must also make sure that you have privacy to vote, right? That means that the privacy panels should be up if you're voting at a machine, and they should allow you to check your vote was counted. They'll give you a paper receipt. Again, you have the right to vote independently, which means you can fill out your ballot on your own without having to rely on help from anyone else. And you don't have to tell anyone who you voted for. You can choose to bring someone with you if you want to a voting center. And if you don't understand English, you can get the ballot and instructions in your language. Just check with the board, again, check with the Board of Elections. If you received your ballot by mail and need help completing it, again, you can ask for help from anyone of your choosing, but it's also your right to complete that privately. So you don't have to. You can choose whatever you want. For candidate, a question I often get is, what about information on the candidates? Who are the people running in the election for office? While I can't tell you who to vote for, but because remember, you have the right to vote, privately and independently on your own. But I can give you information to make an informed choice. The best source of information I know of is the Vote 411 voter guide that's set up by the League of Women Voters. It's a nonpartisan guide that provides information about each candidate and their positions. And I will include the link for this, and also just wanted to briefly show you. So if you go to their website, this is what it looks like. And you can scroll down. I will include this link in the chat. And this is the link. And then what you can do is enter your location, your address, and it will give you a list of each candidate that will appear on your ballot. And it'll give you information about all of them, their positions and their background and links for more information. Okay, let's say you don't want to put in your address. You can still access the information. You can just go to all candidates under this little 3 bars here on the side and click on District of Columbia. And then it'll show you all the candidates, right, alphabetically. And you can click on their names and you can see all their information, right? So it's very helpful. Okay, let me wrap up quickly. This is also helpful, by the way. This guide is available for candidates in every race nationwide. So no matter where you live, you can look up the candidates using your address for other elections as well. One last thing, if you run into any problems getting access to the polling place or using the equipment, first, we recommend talking to a poll worker or call the Board of Elections, and their information is on the left side of the screen. And you can also call us. Our information is on the right side of the screen. We are Disability Rights DC. That is all I have. So thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I don't see any questions yet, but I'm hoping you'll be staying with us. So if people have questions for Peter, if you could put them in the chat, and either we can call him back to answer your questions, or he can respond in the chat now that his presentation's not blocking his view of that. Next up, I'm very happy to introduce and to welcome back virtually to DDS, Jay Penwell, who worked with us for a while and is now with the DC Board of Elections. And Jay is joined by Matt McCullough virtually, who will be available to respond to any questions. So I think Jay is doing his own slides, correct?
I am. First off, I want to check, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Ms. Lee. I appreciate that. I am happy to be back with my DDS family. It's been a while, and it's kind of interesting coming back in a new role. So That being said, let me share my screen really quickly and we'll get rolling. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do today is to complement what Peter had to say. Peter's a great partner in this endeavor. We've met several times. We've talked, we've hashed through things. So I'm going to try not to repeat what he said, but rather just kind of give more logistical information about this year's election for the primary. So with that being said, for some reason, can't seem to go to the next slide. There we go. Okay. So our primary election this year is on June 21st. And all eligible voters should receive a ballot in the mail. With, like Peter said, they're going out in waves. So if you haven't gotten yours yet, don't despair, they're coming. They're on their way. Make sure that you update your registration. And again, that has to be done if you're doing so by mail by next week, May 31st. The voter registration application, we've already seen that, so I don't want to belabor it, but I do want to talk about if you wanted to change your party affiliation, that also must be done by the 31st. The District of Columbia is a closed primary system, meaning that you have to be registered with a particular political party to be able to vote in the election. And then you'll only be eligible to vote in the contest in the party in which you're registered. So if you're a registered Democrat, you would only receive the candidates that are also registered and running as Democrats. So if you want to make that change, you can do that up through the 31st if doing so by mail. And otherwise, you would have to come in or go to a polling place, such as an early vote center starting June 10th. Now, the deadline, like we've been talking about, May 31st is that biggie if you're wanting to register by mail or make changes by mail. So it has to be postmarked by May 31st. Same day registration, like Peter said, is absolutely possible, and it's available during early voting and on election day if you missed that deadline. Totally okay. Now, also, early voting is going to be happening from Friday, June 10th, 2022, until Sunday, June 19th, 2022. The early vote centers will be closed in observance of the Juneteenth holiday on Monday, June 20th. So that's a little different from in the past. Usually it's the direct 10 days moving up until the election. But this year we're going to have that little break. We're going to have 40 early vote centers scattered around the city. And like Peter said, in each ward, there's at least 3. They're open from 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. And at these early vote centers in certain designated places, we'll have both spoken language interpreters and sign language interpreters available, as we've identified from past usage. But there's also going to be an option for interpreting virtually via the language line solution. So we'll have what we call our accessibility pad, so that interpretation is there should anyone need it. Now on election day again is June 21st, and we'll have a total of 90 election centers open, or vote centers open. So that's the 40 early vote centers that will be open, as well as 50 additional centers. Now I want to take this time to let everyone know that in the District of Columbia, we are using the vote center approach. So you don't have to go to an assigned polling place. You can go to any polling place, any election or vote center, and cast your ballot. You don't have to go to, so let me give you an example. Say you want to vote on your lunch hour, but you don't live and work close to each other, but there's another vote center that's very close to your work. You can do that. That's totally fine. You can go to any vote center that is out there. On election day, they will be open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. As long as you are in line at 8 p.m., you are allowed to cast your ballot. At 8 p.m., even if there are still people in line, those that are in line will be able to proceed through into the voting center, but there will be a hard cutoff that if you're not in line by 8 p.m., you won't be able to cast your vote. Let's talk a little bit about our accessible remote ballot. So our accessible remote ballot is called Omni Ballot, and it comes from an organization called Democracy Live. It's like Peter was saying, absolutely ADA compliant, and it's an accessible alternative to mark your ballot. Someone that may use this may be someone who needs an alternative to making marks on paper. How do you get this ballot? Well, you would send an email to ogc@dcboe.org. I will receive that email. You'll email the application that you received. If you need an application, I can send it to you, but it is listed on our website. You'll fill out the application and then sign or mark your signature, and then you will send that back to me, and then I will send the link over to you for you to be able to access that ballot. And this hasn't been used that often, but I'd love to see a lot more people use the accessible remote ballot. So if you know people that are registered voters in the District of Columbia that could benefit from using our accessible remote ballot, please let them know. We're trying to get the word out there. But I find that the best way to let people know that this is an option is to engage folks and get it out into the community. So if I could ask for all of your help to get this information out, that would be great. Now, again, like Peter said, the ballot after it's been marked must be printed and returned to the Board of Elections, and that can be done by the U.S. Postal Service in your sealed mail ballot envelope. So you would take the envelope that you received with your mail ballot and replace it with the one that's been marked with the ARB. And then you can put it in the mail. You can put it in one of 55 drop boxes that is located around the city. And those, just as a note for the drop boxes, those opened today. I actually went ahead and put my ballot in the one here at the Board of Elections headquarters. And you can also turn it in at any vote center during early voting or on election day. Now, just to note, if you are turning in that ballot on during early voting or on election day, you do not have to stand in line. You can give it to any poll worker who will then put that into the special ballot box inside the vote center. Now, when it comes to trusted sources of information, I think it's really important, like Peter said, the information is everything. We can provide you that information, and that voter guide website is a great one. But I also wanted you to have our information. As you can see here, our website is www.dcboe.org. Our phone number is listed here. We're also quite active on social media, including Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And our handle is @vote4DC. And you can take a look at all of the information that's coming out there. Interestingly enough, we did have a posting today of a Dropbox location that wasn't depicting an accessible Dropbox location. So someone in the community asked the question, hey, can this be moved? Because it doesn't look like there's enough clearance. So we got to work, and I actually personally surveyed every one of the Dropbox locations and every one of the vote centers. That's a lot of places in DC that I've seen now that I hadn't seen before. And they are accessible. What we found out was that particular picture was a picture from 2 years ago. And even 2 years ago, we realized that that was not in a correct location and moved it. So we are getting the information out, but there are sometimes things that we miss. So we would love to hear from the community. If you see something that seems that's not quite accessible, let us know. And we can take a look at it, or we can figure out if that was something that went up in mistake, which is what happened today. You also see here the email addresses to request an absentee ballot, but again, you wouldn't really need an absentee ballot sent to you because we're sending all of the ballots to all of the registered voters. But there may be a situation in which you have to request an absentee ballot be sent to another location. Say if you're going to be outside of the DC local area during our voting timeframes, and you can have your absentee ballot sent to another address. That's totally fine. And then we have our outreach division. If ever we want to partner more with the disability community to really rev up the vote. There's a national campaign called Rev Up the Vote to get folks who have disabilities to feel empowered and enfranchised to come out and cast their vote and make their voice heard, and really make use of that right that's afforded to vote. So with that, that's about all I've got. I wanted to thank you, give you my email address and my phone number. That's my direct phone number. Feel free to call me. Just a couple of caveats. I did want to say that at every vote center this primary election, there will be curbside voting. In the past, some vote centers did not have curbside, but at every vote center, there will be curbside. There will be voter assistance clerks there to provide you any assistance that you may need. And all of our poll workers have gone through training. So with that, I guess do we have any questions?
So I have not seen any questions so far, except the question that I sent to Peter, and he said I should share this question with the Board of Elections. So
Okay.
You are probably aware, Jay, that at DDA, we have a number of people who are district residents. They apply for services in DC, and we have placed them in placements in Maryland.
Yes.
And so they reside in Maryland, and I expect that many of them, if they chose to, could vote in Maryland. However, they continue to be DC residents, so they could vote in DC. I do know from having voted myself last weekend, and I read the form before I signed it and mailed it off, it did say, I confirm that I'm not voting in any other jurisdiction. So I know that they can't vote twice. But it does seem to me they could choose which jurisdiction, which of the two to vote in. And if it was that they were to vote in DC, what would be their address? So that they can, so that they're assigned to the appropriate ward and ANC location.
That is a great question. I will take that back to our leadership and pose it because I don't have an answer for that. But you're absolutely right. That's a great question. And I'm sure it's not one that's been posed here before. So let me get you an answer and I'll get back with you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hey Jay, this is Matt. The other questions that people may have is there are great chances of people voting early, but they may feel like they can also vote on the actual election day for June 21st. How does the Board of Elections ensure that each resident is given one vote?
Okay. Well, when someone comes in to register, so our voter rolls are online. We use iPads. Well, they're not online. They're on a secure device. But when they go to register, it will show whether or not they have returned their absentee ballot or their mail ballot. And if for some reason there's some question as to say we've received it, and then they vote again and they're like, no, we didn't do that. Then they would fill out what we call a special ballot. And those would be held until we can adjudicate to make sure whether or not their original ballot has already been tabulated. So those are done after the election. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I want to say too, a big thank you to Matt and your team, because the emails come through, they're like, what can we do to support you? Where are we at? Where are we at? And just the communication and the cooperation has been great. This has been my first election with the Board of Elections, and I have learned a lot. So I'm also looking forward to after June 21st because I'm tired.
So Jay, one more question. If a DC resident does have trouble trying to access a certain polling location, or they're having trouble getting onto a curb cut, how should they share that information? Should they share that with the polling manager, or should they contact you? Or how should people share if they're having any trouble trying to access a polling location?
I would absolutely say go ahead and engage anyone who is there on site. Our voters assistant clerks and definitely the site coordinators. But if people also wanted to let me know as well, I would love that information, because that's the only way. I wish I could be at all 90 centers. It's not possible. We're going to have ADA compliance assistants out there trying to, do the best we can. But the more I hear about any issues that come up, the more I can address them. So please, anybody that wants to communicate those with me, feel free to communicate with me directly. I'm here to do whatever I possibly can to help folks be able to exercise that right.
So we do have a question in the chat, which is asking, are people who are supported allowed to vote with an expired ID? We have some people whose IDs have expired and they're having trouble getting a new ID because they don't have an original birth certificate. So do people have to have a current ID in order to vote?
Great question. No, you do not have to have a photo ID to be able to vote in the District of Columbia.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Reese, if I can add to that.
Absolutely.
100% agree. And yeah, like I said, you do not, if you have an expired ID, that is fine. That you do not have to have an ID to vote. You can use, if you have to prove the first time you go to vote, you do have to have something that has your name and address on a piece of paper. That can be a government issued document. That can be, like I said, a tuition from a school or a letter from a homeless shelter, a paycheck stub, a bank statement, or a utility bill, just something that shows your name and address from an official source like that.
Thank you. So as before, if people have other questions, please put them in the chat and we'll respond to them. Otherwise, we'll move on. Next up, Jared Morris, the Chief of Staff here at DDS, is going to provide some information about our new housing coordinator position here, which is a position that we're funding initially using ARPA funds. So Jared, I think you're able to share your screen as well, right? Yes.
I think I am. Are you able to see that now, Andy?
Yep.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Jared Morris. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today to discuss a new position that's got a lot of energy around it within our operations unit, and that is our housing coordinator. We wanted to place this topic, as Andy mentioned earlier, on today's agenda as a way to really bring more context to this role because it is so new to the agency. And it's actually currently in recruitment because it recently became vacant. So if there are folks here who, based on today's talk, would be interested in applying or know of a strong candidate, please feel encouraged to visit our website at dds.dc.gov, and you can conduct a search using the word jobs. And you'll see the link that should be right at the top of the screen that will take you directly to the job announcement. I'd say for the past few months, because the position is so new, some of us at DDS have heard sort of anecdotally that some members of the public and frankly within our agency have varying expectations of what the housing coordinator's job is or should be. So I'd like to briefly go through what DDS's expectations and plans are for this position and how they should yield positive life outcomes for some people and improve government efficiencies. By way of background, for those who may not be as familiar with how this came about, the district had the great opportunity through the American Rescue Plan Act, commonly referred to as ARPA, to secure funding to enhance, expand, and strengthen home and community-based services under its Medicaid program. So one of the areas or initiatives we thought would benefit our program was to bring on a full-time employee who would be responsible for, among other things, organizing, directing, and coordinating a supportive housing program for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to help them transition to and maintain stable, independent housing to promote self-sufficiency and increase life skills. So when we talk about plans for success for this new role and initiative, I think it's important to begin with identifying those key areas where we can make immediate and positive impacts. For example, with the implementation of DD expansion, we certainly should anticipate meeting new people who may have goals of living independently with wraparound supports. So part of our early discussions with them should incorporate a level of education related to community housing resources and options, both for rent and purchase. One activity we've undertaken is developing a draft housing resource guide that will include details and contact information for various district programs that can assist with people transitioning to independent living. Rental assistance, trainings for prospective renters, budget and credit management are just examples of topics that will be included in that resource guide. And as much as the housing coordinator will serve as a resource to many, this person obviously will not be able to be everywhere at all times. Therefore, as people have frequently asked questions or wish to obtain general information, the resource guide will serve as that sort of quick reference and will be published on our website and updated regularly as additional opportunities come online or if option requirements change. As for public and private partnerships, we really view these as vital to our ability to understand, what's in the affordable housing pipeline to see how the people we support can take advantage of, and in some cases, get in at the early stages of some great opportunities that are coming online. In that vein, we have begun reaching out to other district agencies, as well as private developers and community-based organizations to cultivate these relationships and build a menu of options. As an example, we recently engaged with those responsible for the redevelopment of the Berry Farm neighborhood, if people are familiar with that area in the city, that should be offering properties in 2 phases beginning in 2024. So identifying new or even existing living spaces that are accessible by public transportation, are located in areas near families of people we support or near their places of employment, and places with plans for mixed use so that retail is also right next door or downstairs. These are the types of exciting possibilities we want to bring to everyone's attention, which we certainly can accomplish through our person-centered practices at interdisciplinary team meetings, for example, but again, also with that regularly updated housing resource guide that's will be easily accessible through our website. Housing counseling is the next area of success we're aiming for. Kind of going back briefly to public partnerships, DDS has had conversations in prior years with sister agencies like the DC Housing Authority and the Department of Housing and Community Development that have their own programs, but we didn't frankly maintain, the level of consistent communication needed to make much impact. So this new position within DDS is a committed and focused effort to make that impact by educating people on the various housing programs requirement in the district, assisting with strategies to meet program standards, facilitating actual moves. I'll discuss that briefly in a minute. And serving as that point of contact for people who have housing questions or concerns. Assisting people with goals to transition to more independence, obviously, is our ultimate objective for those with such ambition. And when that happens, this is simply tied to DDS's mission of providing those type services that enable people to lead those meaningful and productive lives as vital members of their communities. And the final area that the housing coordinators' work will be felt is with respect to the reduction of the number of vacancies in our current residential settings. An example of a vacancy is when a person resides in one home and leaves that residence permanently. DDS still continues to fund that vacancy to prevent any disruption to the people who continue to reside in that home. So part of the short-term plan here for success is for our housing coordinator to work collaboratively with our provider community to develop plans for vacancy reduction. This should ensure that we're maximizing the available residential locations in our system. So we look forward to kind of kicking that off and achieving that success in the very near future, excuse me. So how is this kind of operationalized? We are in the developmental stage of what the internal referral process will look like. And we've begun having discussions with our service planning and coordination division to establish that workflow. Service coordination is really in the catbird seat, ideally situated within our agency to identify, again, through the person-centered process, those people who desire and would benefit from a referral to the housing coordinator to have the type of individualized conversations that would serve as a foundation to begin those searches for available housing options. So from that vantage point of the service coordinator who knows the people in their caseload very well, they would send that referral to the housing coordinator who would need to establish a meeting date with the person and their team to kind of go over desires. Where would you like to live in the city? Look at any kind of accommodation needs as an example, and sort of use that to build up a profile so that the housing coordinator is able to present various housing options based on the person's preference, their income, and any of the various housing eligibility requirements. It'll be incumbent upon the housing coordinator to assist the person in the team through the registration and application process. This process can be cumbersome. It could be new to many people. So staying in contact with the person and the support team and guiding them through that process will be very important. And obviously, you know, kind of at the end of that, we're looking for an approval of the application. We're looking to pick up the keys and start setting up the moving date to get people out on their own. One of the more underutilized services I'd say that we offer in our IDD waiver provides for one-time transitional costs that can be tapped for this last part of the process. Leasing application fees, security deposits, and furnishings that are customary in moving to a new home. Those are just examples of startup costs that could be covered under that waiver service. So that's something that the housing coordinator along with the service coordinator would need to work together on. So that's really a high level of approach to the internal process. We're still working that out. And that's going to be a strong collaboration both between the DDS operations and service coordination team members to begin those conversations and explore what's available and what's possible for people we support now and who we plan to support in the coming months and years. So
Great,
There's a question.
thank you, Jared. There was,
go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I just looked up at the time. Go ahead if there are questions. I'm ready.
So there was one question in the chat, which is inclusionary zone units can only be won by lottery. People with disabilities have to join the lottery. There's no set aside for this population. Can this be addressed? So we have spoken with DHCD about this on a couple of different occasions, and I'd have to talk further with them about whether that's a regulatory or statutory limitation, but I do know that their position has been they can't have set-asides because once they go down that road, it means set-asides for every different population. But, you know, the efforts we've had so far at trying to seek some kind of set-aside or, you know, some other way of us being able to get our foot in the door separately has not been successful, but we have made those efforts and we'll continue to explore it.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's right, Andy. And when you really look in the district, there's so many, you know, not just district agencies that are responsible for a sort of public housing options. But again, those community-based organizations that DDS really has not heretofore tapped. And that's what this position should really be looking to build relationships with. So, yeah, so when you're talking about House of Ruth or Habitat for Humanity, Mission First, it's really reaching out, letting them know who we are, seeing what they have available, and seeing if we can kind of match that up to present some options for people.
And there is a comment in the chat saying people with disabilities who are working really need assistance with housing. We agree absolutely. And as Jared is saying, there are other opportunities out there, and our hope is that this person will help us plug into all of those. And that's why we're looking for a housing counselor with good experience in the district who knows these resources and can help us to plug our folks into resources that exist in the district. Because beyond, as Jared just said, beyond DC Housing Authority, there are a number of different other resources that have direct connections themselves to public housing resources in the district. So it really is a full-time job trying to find the right resource and connect a person. So we did much better this week in terms of gauging how much content for our hour with everyone. As I said, next month, we're planning on expanding this to 90 minutes. We look forward to meeting in the second week of June with the planning committee folks so that we can talk about what topics are of interest to people so that we can present more helpful information and have more of a discussion with people. So thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to hearing from people next month. I do have two comments in the chat, so I'm going to read those before people step away. Financial literacy is really an important component to ensure that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities can take real advantage of these housing opportunities. Agreed completely, and included in our services is benefits planning, which should include financial literacy, and it is a support that we should be providing to people. Someone has written that they are a licensed realtor in DC. They've successfully placed providers in residential property. There's definitely a need for this position as there's no process in place to bridge the communication gap with all the necessary parties. This person has been able to help the provider agencies, but as we said, we don't really see this as working with provider agencies to bridge the gap with private residential providers. But I am glad that you have been able to help providers to do just that. So this weekend, beginning of summer, it's hard to know that when you look outside today, felt that way last weekend. I hope everyone enjoys their long weekend, and we will talk with you again next month. Thank you very much.